Welcome to Immigration Pro Bono. Don't need to know it all on day one. Sponsored by the ABA Commission on Immigration. To receive CLE credit, you must attend the entire program. Partial credit is not available. Please click on the participation verification alerts to confirm your attendance. After the program ends, a link to complete the certification process will appear. Please complete the evaluation and CLE affidavit, providing your bar information as requested. Submitted. Once your attendance is verified, your certificates will be emailed to you. Moderating the program today is Bonnie Fote. Bonnie is an active pro bono immigration attorney focusing on release from detention and affirmative filings. She currently serves on the Commission on Immigration Advisory Board. Bonnie, you may now proceed with the program.
Thank you. I'd like to briefly introduce the rest of today's panel. Joining me on the program are Morgan Hannah Adams, Sarah Burrows, and Ambreen Walji. Morgan is a pro bono coordinator for Welcome South in Nashville, Tennessee, and staff attorney with the Mid-South Immigration Advocates. Sarah is the director of pro bono and partnerships at Hyas in New York City, and Ambreen is pro bono manager at the ABA's Immigration Justice Project in San Diego, California. Feel free to take a look at their detailed bios, which are available online. As you can see, we have a very distinguished panel today, and I hope that over the next hour we can provide you with some insights into the various immigration pro bono programs which are available and answer some common questions about this type of work. So maybe, Ambreen, you could kick it off for us and tell us what kind of pro bono programs you offer for attorneys who are interested in doing this type of work.
Thanks, Bonnie. As you mentioned, we're based out of San Diego, California, so we're a border city. We've seen a lot of change over the last few years, as I'm sure every project and everyone doing this work has. In the past 2 years, we've basically been focusing on release from immigration detention. A lot of our work focuses on serving the population that's detained at the Otay Mesa Detention Center, which is about 6 miles north of the Tijuana border. And so, as you can imagine, during the pandemic, and currently the situation was pretty precarious for people living in that close living environment. So we had volunteer attorneys assist us in helping file for petitions for release like bond and parole applications. And now as cases are progressing and courts are continuing to pick up where they left off before the pandemic, and court cases and hearings are continuing, we now have a need for representation for removal cases for both the detained population at Otay Mesa, but we're also seeing families in downtown San Diego Immigration Court. Those are families who are on an accelerated timeline as a result of the dedicated docket. They are families who are new arrivals and asylum seekers. So we're looking for some support from volunteers to assist on those cases. And additionally, we have limited scope opportunities or more limited opportunities for people who can't take on a full removal case. For example, we have attorneys who are supporting us on doing research for country conditions to support asylum applications, attorneys who are assisting us on briefing and appeals as well as some affirmative work, because we have clients who have, as a result of their detention, their long detention, they have been victims of crimes and so on. And so we have attorneys who are assisting with U visas for assaults and so on that have happened while they have been in immigration detention, as well as affirmative asylum filings.
Hi, everyone.
Morgan?
I'm Morgan Hannah Adams. Hi, everyone. As Bonnie mentioned, I'm an attorney with Mid-South Immigration Advocates, and we are based in Memphis, and I work out of our Nashville, Tennessee office. I also serve as our pro bono coordinator, and that's for Welcome South. Welcome South is a collaboration of 3 nonprofit immigration legal services organizations, all based in Memphis, and our goal is really to access or provide more access to counsel and provide clients with just attorneys and representation to get immigration status here in the United States. So in my role as pro bono coordinator, I recruit attorneys to take on these cases. I assign cases to them, and I also train them on how to do this work. And I provide resources and guidance on how to represent your clients in these immigration proceedings and with applications. And right now, with Welcome South, the main cases that we are asking pro bono attorneys to take on are for special immigrant juvenile status, primarily those state court predicate orders. Of course, if there are attorneys who would like to go on to, filling out the I-360, which is the actual special immigrant juvenile status application, we are more than happy to let them do that as well until going to lawful permanent residency. But right now, we primarily ask pro bono attorneys to take more of those bite-sized pieces of cases because we understand that pro bono attorneys have their own practices, and so we try to make it more manageable. Other than the predicate orders, we also have some asylum cases. So we ask pro bono attorneys to take on some of those, but primarily it is the predicate orders right now. For asylum, we do ask pro bono attorneys to either fill out the entire I-589, complete that entire process, and sometimes we, of course, allow us pro bono attorneys to pick and choose, of course, if they just want to do the country conditions research. We've also had a firm help out on some of our naturalization cases. So we were able to get some assistance with clients who were applying to naturalize. As I mentioned earlier, we're really big on letting the pro bono attorneys have the autonomy to choose what types of cases that they want to take and which parts of cases that they want to take instead of giving them entire cases that may take years to complete. And lastly, I just wanted to mention that our program is entirely virtual. So pro bono attorneys are able to help from pretty much wherever. So we have an entire platform called Law Lab, and that's where pro bono attorneys can look at client information, upload documents, communicate with me or via email. And they can also upload any documents or any relief or any applications that they've done for the clients. And again, this is with Welcome South. We're based in Memphis, but we also have a Nashville office for the work that I do with Mid-South Immigration Advocates and Welcome South.
And I can go last. I'm Sarah Burrows again. I'm the Director of Pro Bono and Partnerships at HIAS. HIAS is an international organization that works to support refugees, asylees, asylum seekers, and other forcibly displaced populations. We currently work in 17 different countries all around the world, but in the United States, where our pro bono program that I run is based, we work across the country through a network of affiliate organizations to help support refugees, as well as other populations that receive benefits through the Office of Refugee Resettlement, like Afghan parolees and Ukrainian parolees. And then we also have legal teams in New York City and the Washington, D.C. Metro area, where we do immigration law for forcibly displaced people, largely focused on humanitarian immigration pathways. Our pro bono program has two main buckets of projects that we work on with our pro bono attorneys. The first is what we consider our full representation work. These are cases where attorneys are entering an appearance and really seeing the case all the way through from start to finish. A lot of these cases stem from our legal teams in New York and the DC area, but not all of them. So there are remote opportunities to get involved with full rep. Largely, this looks like asylum cases for people in the New York and DC areas, both affirmative and defensive. We also do adjustment of status applications, largely out of our New York office, and naturalizations out of our New York office. And then we have a national temporary protected status project that's done remote to serve TPS seekers from all over the country. The second bucket of opportunities that we have, very similar to what you've already heard from the other presenters, is what we call our limited scope work. Understanding that that immigration cases can often take a really long time. We agree with Morgan that it's really helpful to create opportunities for attorneys to just do a discrete piece of a project or take on smaller scale work that still really supports the clients that we serve. So we have a country conditions research project to help with the asylum work that we do more broadly. We help run a monthly temporary protected status remote pro se clinic, actually in partnership with our friends at the ABA Commission on Immigration. And through these monthly remote clinics, we also do work authorizations for certain parole populations, including Ukrainians. We also run a fairly big Afghan asylum project, which is also in partnership with the American Bar Association Commission on Immigration, to help support Afghan asylum seekers all over the country who need help preparing their application, getting it filed, and getting prepared for their interview. We consider this one of our limited scope projects because attorneys don't enter an appearance or attend the interview. But it is fairly longer term in that we do expect attorneys to put together the application and really get the applicant in the best position possible to be able to advocate for themselves at the interview. And I think I'll pause there.
Great, thanks. That was such a terrific overview of these opportunities. Just so people in the audience know, we'll be posting in the chat links to the various different programs and opportunities so that you can check them out if you're interested. And also, if you have questions you'd like to ask the panelists, we'll take those at the end, and you can go ahead and enter those in the question and answer box on your screen. So now that we've heard a little bit about the programs, I know my background was a corporate transactional lawyer, and when I started thinking about doing immigration work, I was a little overwhelmed about the prospect. And so maybe, Sarah, you could talk a little bit about, what are some of the common barriers or issues you see with new people in the immigration pro bono space, and how you've successfully guided those attorneys through this process.
Sure, I'm happy to start, and then interested to hear what the rest of the panel has to say on this question as well. I think there's a couple things that almost always come up, particularly early in a pro bono case. The first is around language. A lot of the clients we serve are not native or fluent English speakers, and oftentimes pro bono attorneys need to work via interpreters. And so considering language boundaries and interpretation issues and how to communicate properly with your client is really important. Both making sure that you have access to regular and reliable interpretation, but also early on in the representation, making sure you have a full understanding of your client's language skills, so that you know if you need interpretation, even for the simplest of emails to schedule a meeting. And if that's not considered and handled early on, it can create some pretty big issues in communication really from the start. There's also other difficulties that come around communication too that you should keep in mind. A lot of the clients we serve may not have access to regular internet, or may have jobs that don't let them step away to take a phone call, or may just have different ideas around how to communicate that can really impact a case. So for example, you might have a client that is really difficult to communicate with, or you might have a client that calls you every single day asking for an update in the case. And this can be a challenge in sort of both directions. So we at Highest in our pro bono program really emphasize early on setting a communication plan with your client, making sure that you have several methods to contact the client, making sure that you've talked to the client about how you're going to communicate with each other, what times of day you can call them, reminding them to leave a voice message if they call you, and just really being clear about how often you're going to talk and how you're going to talk can just set the groundwork and create trust early on. And sort of along those same lines, setting expectations with the client is really important. A lot of the trouble and issues that we see early on is just there being different ideas about what the representation is going to look like. So explaining to the client how long it's going to take to get their packet ready to file, how long their case might take, what delays might look like, what the work you're going to do to support them is. A lot of our clients have more than one legal issue, have more than one immigration pathway, and it's important they understand the work that you're going to be doing on their behalf so that there's no confusion down the road. And then also what you need from them, how you're going to be working together, and what the expectations are from their side. Again, just so the trust is established early on, and that you're sort of starting at the same point with your client. And one thing Highest does is provide some information in our toolkits about how to best have those conversations, some tips for how to set up meetings with your client, some tips around communication, so that you're prepared to do that work early on. There's one other thing I think it's important to mention is many of our clients are survivors of trauma, and that can create its own issues when you're working with somebody who's experienced something really hard in their lives, both because the clients we serve have a lot going on and their immigration case might not be the most important thing to them at any given day, but also because, and I'm not a neuroscience scientist, so I can't speak to this in any detail, but we do know that trauma memories are stored differently from other memories, which means, and I'm sure the other panelists can attest to this as well, we often hear from attorneys, the client story doesn't make sense, or they aren't remembering important details, or they just remembered something 3 months into the representation. Why did this not come out sooner? And I just want to make it very clear that that is extremely normal, largely because of the fact that these clients are survivors of trauma and don't remember things the same way. So again, HIAS has some resources available to that to help with all of that and help figure out how to best work with your client so that they do trust you, so that they do feel safe and comfortable, and so that their story does start coming out and you can get it together for them. And then the last thing I wanted to note, and I think I've sort of touched upon this, but we've put together materials, we have resources available. The other big issue we see is when pro bono attorneys don't look at those resources. You really need to review the toolkits we provide, you need to review the trainings, you need to refer to them often. A lot of the answers you're looking for are there. And it's easy to miss something or make a mistake if you don't double check everything, and ask your mentor as well. So I think that's what I wanted to mention, and interested to hear what everybody else has to add as well.
Thank you, Sarah. I believe also establishing at the outset what the scope of representation is for the client is really important. So if you're focusing on representing the client in the predicate order process and not the I-360 special immigrant juvenile status, to let the client know that. If you're representing the client, for example, with their lawful permanent residency, but not the naturalization stage, letting the client know that. If you are doing country conditions research, you may not even talk to the client if you're not doing the actual asylum application, but you just want to let your client know what you're doing and what you're not doing. If you're filing the application, but you're not going to do anything pertaining to court or removal proceedings, you want to let the client know that. And I believe it's also okay if after you represent the client and after you're finished doing your work for the client, if they still come to you and ask you to do something or still have follow-up questions, I believe it's okay to let them know, hey, remember this was the scope of the representation, so I don't represent you for the rest of it, and maybe offering resources or a list of other pro bono attorneys who can possibly assist. Another thing, just following up to what Sarah mentioned about the language barriers, that's super important. Obviously, we can't communicate with our clients if we don't know their language. So I recommend getting some type of partnership in place with some interpreters or pro bono interpreters where you can facilitate that exchange. So your pro bono attorneys have that resource. Some firms have, a robust system where they are able to probably provide attorneys or interpreters. Smaller firms may not have that. Bigger firms may not have that. So, for example, with Welcome South, I've established a partnership with our Tennessee Administrative Office of the Courts. And so every time we have an interpreter need, I send over that need to my contact at the Administrative Office of the Courts, and they send out the interpreter need to their entire listserv of attorneys, or of interpreters, I'm sorry. And so that works out really well when pro bono attorneys want to help, but they don't know the language, they need the interpreter. And so I help facilitate that exchange so the pro bono attorney has access to that language. Additionally, just following up, getting in touch with clients is super important. Also figuring out what works best for your client in terms of communication. Some clients are, call, or if you have, teenagers, they may like to text, and, you may need to talk to them and let them know, hey, we need to talk. You may have very few clients that have email, but also if you can't get in touch with your client, it's important to, obviously try as hard as you can, but if you can't get in touch with them, also reaching out to that pro bono program, that original referrer, to see if they have an alternative way to contact the client, because they may have additional information or numbers or addresses. And additionally, deadlines. So if it's an urgent deadline, that's super important. Usually, pro bono attorneys are good about meeting those deadlines, but sometimes, not all the time. But you also have times when you have applications that aren't necessarily as urgent, but you still want to be efficient in getting those types of relief and applications done. So, and for example, also when you have clients that are moving around constantly, so you don't want to miss the opportunity to help someone if maybe their phone service or something gets disconnected. With Welcome South, we actually have a 30-day rule that we like to really abide by, and we ask our pro bono attorneys to please contact their client and begin work on the case within 30 days, at least making that initial contact and setting up that initial consultation or conversation within the first 30 days is really important. So just staying on top of those deadlines, getting in touch with the clients, and making sure you have interpreters readily available, and then establishing, we've already said the scope of rep.
Thanks to Sarah and Morgan. I think those are really good points. Some of them we can echo with our work here in detention and at the border. We do work with a lot of new arrivals to the United States. Being in San Diego, we are often the first point of contact, and the court here is often their first encounter in the U.S. immigration system, whether they're detained or non-detained. And that, as Sarah mentioned, the clients that we serve also face a lot of trauma, and the court system itself can be re-traumatizing for these clients. So one issue that we do see come up is attorneys trying to navigate getting to the details of a client's story, and trying to get what they need from the client without re-traumatizing the client. That's often a challenge that we ourselves in-house face. And one of the solutions is to develop rapport, which can be especially challenging when someone is detained in immigration detention and their access to communication is limited to what is available or made available by the facility. And so we try in-house, I try to help facilitate that communication, whether it's assisting with scheduling calls, document transfers, signatures, and so on. We try to help our pro bono attorneys by gathering, those initial signatures and so on if they are working on a case remotely. And the other thing to be conscious of is that the range of education and sophistication that our clients come from really varies. We see population from all over the world. People think of San Diego as encountering a population from the Northern Triangle, but we see clients from Cameroon, from all over West Africa, from Russia, really everywhere around the world. So understanding a client's experience and what they came to, their journey to the United States is often really helpful, beyond understanding their country of origin and the trauma that they faced in home country. A lot of them face a lot of trauma in making that journey to the United States, and they haven't had the opportunity to speak to anybody about that. So our pro bono attorneys are kind of taking that in as well. Another common issue that we see is the speed at which cases progress in immigration court really varies, and we might be able to place a case or speak about, placing a case that we anticipate will conclude within 6 months, but given the circumstances of either the client or the court, we've seen cases take a little bit longer. And so we try to prepare our volunteer attorneys for what is to come and give them opportunities to address that with the client as well, and set client expectations, because like I said, this is often the first encounter that clients have with the immigration court system. We also do face interpretation challenges, and our volunteers face interpretation challenges. We work with volunteer interpreters primarily when we are placing or working with volunteer attorneys. And so facilitating the scheduling of those calls, we try to assist with that as well, in-house as much as we can. And as well, we try to assist with document translation using volunteers that we have in our network.
Great, thanks. And there was a question in the chat about how to go about finding interpretation services. And I would just suggest to check with the pro bono the organization that you're working with, because oftentimes they'll either match you to a case and provide you with resources for that, or to a language that you already speak, or will have access to other resources that you can use for language interpretation. Um, so, I think, another challenge that we face in this space is that, this is immigration is constantly in a state of flux in terms of like the laws and decisions that are coming down and regulations that are changing. So how do you help, pro bono's attorneys, with this ever changing landscape that we face?
I think that's an excellent question. I have some colleagues that call it overnight regulations. So sometimes, you'll learn something and you wake up the next day and there's an entirely new law or regulation. So obviously, first, it's super important to always be abreast of the law, um, obviously, but I believe there's also other resources that are very, helpful and still accurate and beneficial to this work. And so I always let pro bono attorneys know that I'm here to support. Ask me if you have questions. I make myself available for phone appointments, for responding to emails. And so I practice immigration law in my daily practice representing clients. And so I usually know the answer or I can go and find the answer. So I encourage our pro bono attorneys to ask me any questions that they have. A lot of them don't do immigration in on their primary jobs. And so it's really important for them to have that resource and just have that support where they know they can call someone or email someone to help them with an immigration matter or question. Also, webinars and trainings and CLEs are so important. So, webinars and trainings, these CLEs are usually the most up to date, items a lot of the times. And so, for example, about 2 weeks ago, I did an immigration CLE. I presented on SIJS, so Special Immigrant Juvenile Status. And so I distributed that link to register to a lot of our pro bono attorneys in our Welcome South program, just so they could have it as an additional resource, learn more, solidify some skills that they already have. And I think that was, really helpful for some of them to just have that as an additional resource. So webinars, trainings, CLEs, these definitely help with this ever-changing landscape. Additionally, the United States Citizenship and Immigration Service website. So USCIS is one of my best friends. So I'm always checking USCIS. If I have to file something, the filing address may be different. There may be new additional evidence or documents or components to an application that you may need to start filing with a particular application. So you definitely want to check out USCIS if you're filing applications with that service, affirmative applications, and there are a range of applications that you can file with USCIS. So you really want to pay attention to that website. They post updates all the time. You can go to look at your particular form, what additions that you're supposed to be using, which ones are expired, what details are supposed to be in your forms. It tells you a list of the form instructions, a list of components that you need to include in your application. So the USCIS website is very, very helpful. And last, of course, practice manuals and things from EOIR are very helpful as well.
Thanks for that, Morgan. We also try to keep abreast with what's out there, whether that's USCIS, EOIR, but the American Immigration Lawyers Association has some very relevant practice manuals that we utilize and we send our volunteer attorneys. We try to direct attorneys to these resources as well as the webinars that are put on by the ABA and by other organizations, HIAS as well. We try to direct our attorneys to take use of whatever is out there. We're also often learning as things change. So it can be challenging to keep on top of everything that's going on and to be relaying that information. But we try to have regular check-ins with our volunteer attorneys. And I try to maintain good communication with them and make myself available as a resource. As well, we rely on our partners for some mentorship, whether that's a experienced immigration attorney who's volunteering as well to act as a mentor, or an established partnership like that with the Immigration Justice Campaign, which is a project under AILA. They help mentor some of our cases as well, and they produce really good content that is often produced almost contemporaneously with what's going on in the immigration landscape. But, a lot of it does fall on the volunteer attorney to make sure that you are able to log into those webinars or catch up on recorded webinars. And so we try to gauge volunteer interest when we're placing the cases, and we try to understand what case a volunteer would be most interested in, so that they might be more inclined to, go the extra mile and be well versed in the changes in the law. And I think that's it.
Yeah, I think Ambreen and Morgan did a great job, really just emphasizing that we all understand that pro bono attorneys likely are not practicing immigration attorneys and aren't experts in this field. So I think I would just reiterate the point that keep an eye out for the toolkits, for the practice advisories, for the trainings, and watch them and use them. And utilize the organization you're working with. Make sure you're checking in with them before you file something, that they're giving it a review. Even if you've done some of these cases in the past, don't assume you know what you're doing, because things might have changed. So utilize the great programs that are represented on this panel and all the other great pro bono programs across the country, and just check in and review and go to the trainings.
Great, thanks. Those are all super helpful tips, and I found that the resources that are available to pro bono attorneys are really rich and, really span a spectrum. I didn't know anything when I came into doing this work, and they were super helpful in getting up to speed. So even a transactional lawyer from the corporate side can really dive into this work. One of the interesting things I found with my pro bono work was the impact of COVID, and how that's changed some of this work into remote work and assignments, which has actually opened up opportunities that might not have been there before. So I was wondering if the panel could comment on how remote assignments and representation, have been working for you, and what opportunities are there?
Sure, I can start with this one. The pandemic definitely represented a very dark time for all of us, but for especially people who were living in confined living situations. And that was the case for the detained population that we serve at Otay Mesa, but also at the Imperial Regional Detention Center, which is almost more remote, but we also serve that population. And so, like Bonnie mentioned, there was a great need and remains a great need for legal representation. And it was almost the first time that we were able to offer remote opportunities, and for the remote appearances to be, widely offered throughout the country. And it was especially meaningful for our project to be able to get volunteer representation for people who were trying to be released from detention. And that trend has continued now, and judges are more than ever more amenable to remote appearances by attorneys. It used to be the case that it would be extremely challenging to, or at least it would be challenging to be able to represent a client remotely in our courts here in San Diego. But now, given policy directives such as the one that was put out by the Department of Justice in November 2021, encouraging judges to think through that it is a pro bono attorney who's appearing on a case, and that they should be more amenable to a remote appearance. That has been a game changer in terms of offering more representation for the population that we see, and more opportunities for volunteer attorneys. We regularly have opposing counsel appear by WebEx, and now there's a movement more to have witnesses appear by WebEx and clients appear by WebEx, and that that makes things a lot easier for families, for people who are gathering evidence or presenting a case, to have their evidence and their witnesses be able to present remotely is crucial. But the reality of remote work is that it also presents challenges. I'm sure Bonnie and others can attest to volunteers who have had frustrations in reaching a client because they can't go and meet. They're too far to go and meet with the client in person. And especially for the detained population that we work with, we are subject to what the facility, what the constraints are on the movement of the person in the facility to legal visitation or their access to a telephone call. And so thankfully we run the orientation programs, the Know Your Rights presentations with the facilities. And so we have a presence there and we're able to help facilitate those phone calls and those attorney meetings. And then we also try to facilitate for our non-detained population that's being represented by volunteers, for the clients to either come in to our office and be able to access consistent internet and a consistent phone line. And we make that meeting space available if they're meeting remotely with a volunteer. Of course, when we're meeting with families and as we do more representation of families in non-detained court, confidentiality is a challenge. They're often, when clients are taking calls, it's sometimes at home in a living environment where there's many people around. So we try to encourage attorneys to have that conversation with the client around confidentiality and the importance of confidentiality. But also, like I mentioned, we try to make a space available for the client to come in and meet remotely with their assigned volunteer attorney.
Thank you, Ambreen. I like to add to that just that it's more, some of the things, well, for one, it's more accessible as far as immigration court. I practice here in Nashville, and so in our jurisdiction, our immigration court is in Memphis. So now for clients to have their hearings or master calendar hearings or individuals, instead of traveling to Memphis, they can come to my office and we can have the hearing here via WebEx. And so that, unless the hearing's been dismissed or something like that. But so for one, it can make it more accessible for clients to be able to attend their hearings. Additionally, one challenge, kind of a challenge with remote, is that you don't have your client right in front of you all the time. And so if you have some signature pages or something for an application that needs to be signed, it's really important that you specify via phone and on the document, even with sticky notes or whatever you have to do, this is where you sign or this is where you put a date, because it can get a little lost in translation when you're mailing these documents, especially if you're used to doing it in person and you can tell your client just right then and there, this is where you sign or this is where you do this. And so just by being specific with your clients up front, that alleviates and reduces the need to resend things, and that postpones applying for relief. Confidentiality definitely is important, and so that is sometimes a struggle with remote, because you really just don't know who's in the room if you're not in the room with the client. And so if you have children, for example, the child is the client. And so even though the parent is their guardian and has probably their best interest, you really have to stress that, hey, the child is our client. And so we really need to speak to the client. And so don't be afraid to have those conversations in respectful ways to parents and guardians when you really need to talk to the child and get information from the child that might not feel comfortable saying these things in front of their guardian. Additionally, in the pandemic, it has been one thing that has been, I guess, a bit helpful is that you still get your rights. So with Mid-South Immigration Advocates, we represent children, adults, in that capacity, lawful permanent residency, asylum, U visa, T visa, all that. And so with those Know Your Rights presentations, it was awesome that children were still getting their rights presented to them, still getting legal screenings, even when things shut down. Those are able to still get done and facilitated via a remote space. So that was a positive. So there've been ups and downs with the remote, but I think that collectively as immigration practitioners, we've really, worked to make it work and help our clients the best way possible.
Thanks. I don't really have too much to add. I think that was all really helpful. I would just say that obviously there are benefits to remote work. It's given HIAS's program an opportunity to expand the populations that we reach and actually develop new programming to work with people all across the country, both on the pro bono attorney side and the client side. But things come up, and I would again reiterate the importance of seeking out the resources, the toolkits, and the expertise of the organizations that you're working with, because we all have stuff available to help you troubleshoot those issues that might arise in remote representation. And the other thing I just wanted to briefly mention is, just because we are in the space where we can do a lot of work remote doesn't take away the fact that sometimes you just need to meet with somebody in person, particularly if it's a project where you are co-located. You're going to be going to court. There's going to be some sort of in-person appearance. There are clients that just need to be physically in the room, and there is a benefit from that. So don't let that get lost in some of the remote work. Obviously, there are situations where you can't, if the client's in California and you're in New York. But if you are in the same city or state, think of that as another option when you're sort of figuring out how to best represent the client that you serve.
That's great. I think those are super helpful. I do think that, remote has its pluses and minuses. And so it's good to just keep all of those factors in mind as you approach this work. So maybe, you all could tell us about a time when, we're all afraid of making mistakes, when someone made a mistake, and, how you were able to assist the pro bono attorney in navigating through that.
Sure, I can
Sarah,
start with this one, and I did. Sure. Yeah, I can get us started. And I did give some thought to if I had a specific example of a mistake that was made that I wanted to share. And nothing came to mind that I thought would be particularly helpful. So if it's okay, I think I'll just talk a little bit more generally about some mistakes that we either anticipate or see generally. I do want to emphasize that in this practice, there are some pretty big mistakes that can be made that are really hard to fix. Just like any other case that you're working on, pro bono or other clients in your regular practice or in your pro bono practice, if there's a hard deadline, if there's a hard filing deadline, you have to meet it. If there's a court date, you have to go to it. And it's really important that you treat these cases as if they're on your regular docket, part of your regular practice, and you calendar deadlines and you calendar court dates, and you know the rules around filing and serving so that you don't miss those. The biggest example, obviously, is in asylum cases. There's a 1-year filing deadline. There's some exceptions, of course, but generally a person needs to file for asylum within 1 year of their entry to the U.S., and missing that deadline could really cause some serious issues for their asylum case. I have had attorneys miss court dates. I do not recommend it. Particularly master calendars. It just adds a lot of work to your plate to get a case reopened if it's the client's ordered removed in absentia. So, again, I think it is easy to stay away and avoid those issues if you just do proper case management. But there are plenty of mistakes that attorneys make that can be fixed. Putting the incorrect information on an application that's filed, for example, we can fix those mistakes at an interview or troubleshoot the best way to make sure that USCIS or the immigration court is updated appropriately. Telling clients the wrong information is something that certainly happens, particularly among pro bono attorneys who don't practice in this area regularly. And again, that's why I have been emphasizing this whole panel of taking a look at resources and double checking stuff and checking in with your mentors. Obviously, if you tell the client something that turns out to be incorrect, we can fix that. We can give them the right information, but that can impact trust, and it's not a situation you want to be in. I think I had one other thing I wanted to know. I think one thing that can happen a lot with pro bono attorneys who do this work is knowing enough to be dangerous, right? Having the basic idea of what's going on. And so instead of double checking or reconfirming or just making sure that you are saying the right thing, you might have the instinct to say what you think the answer is. And that's something we see happen a lot with attorneys who do this work on a pro bono basis, but may not be their regular practice. And then we do have to go back and fix it. And although we can often figure it out and it ends up not being a huge deal, it can impact your credibility with the client. So I know I've been kind of saying this the entire panel, but please take a look at the toolkits and the resources and the trainings that all of our programs have created. It really is our job to make sure that you have access to the tools you need to be successful in these cases. So utilize those tools so that you avoid mistakes, or so if you make a mistake, you can easily fix it and it's something that's not going to be too big of an issue.
Thank you, Sarah. I think you hit on most of it. Yeah, I would definitely like to follow up on the if you don't know the answer, like don't tell your client if you don't know the answer. We understand that most pro bono attorneys are not doing immigration cases, so we don't expect you to know everything. Please, even if you're in an appointment right now with at the exact moment with a client and you feel pressured to tell them something, just don't. Just say, I will let you know once I find out. And so if that's contacting the pro bono coordinator, the attorney that's over the program. If you go and do some research and you still don't understand it, definitely just ask the pro bono attorney or coordinator or the attorney on the program, because you just don't want to give the clients the wrong information. And as I believe Sarah mentioned, it hurts trust and all that kind of stuff. And you don't want the clients to have the wrong information and do the wrong thing, and then that impact their case negatively. We also provide mentors here with Welcome South, even though I typically am the one who answers these questions. If there's ever a time where we need to place with mentors, we have people that are available to help mentor. Another mistake, it's not always huge, but just something just to keep in mind. If documents or applications require signatures, they require signatures. If it asks for a signature from the client, the attorney, the interpreter, you have to have those signatures or it will get rejected. If you don't include a piece of evidence that's really important, it will probably get rejected. If you are supposed to include passport photos with an application and you don't, it's going to get rejected. And so that usually you can fix that. You can usually, send in what they need, but it's just really important to try to get it right the first time, because it further delays the client's benefits when you have to resend things and send things later. But it's not always the end of the world if you miss a signature. That you can send that back in. But if you have a hard deadline, then it can be really bad. So just keep those things in mind about making sure you don't give the wrong information and include everything that needs to be included in those applications.
I'll just add, I think you really hit the mark, Morgan and Sarah, when you were talking about taking on more than you can chew, from a legal perspective, but also from a client expectation perspective. We've worked with attorneys who are well-intentioned and really want to help as many people as possible, and have shared their number with their client and let them share or encourage them to share their own phone number with other prospective clients, and then have started working with them and without us knowing, and have had issues further along in the case where we find out that this person definitely bit off more than they can chew. We work with people who are vulnerable as a result of them being detained and a result of where they come from, and how they got to where we are. So I think there's an impulse, and it's a well-meaning impulse for volunteers to really serve as many people as possible. And once they get, some information, they think it's easy enough, keep going, take on more clients, and that's great, and it's awesome to see, and it is the reason why we do this work. But it needs to be supported, and we try to make ourselves available and try to explain to our volunteers that a phone number in detention going around will mean 100 calls over the course of a month. So setting the expectations and having those conversations with the client about the limits of your representation. Also, one thing that we've seen is not allowing allotting enough time for review of filings or preparation of filings. We try to support our attorneys whenever they need it, but the reality is that if you have a 9 a.m. deadline or the next day deadline and you send us something at 11 p.m., it's almost impossible for us to do much to assist or to have the back and forth that would be necessary to provide good mentorship on the review of a brief or a filing. The other thing that we try to keep in mind is keeping in touch with your client as much as possible. Some of our cases do, range from a 6-month commitment or a 2-month commitment to a multi-year commitment depending on the case posture. And so keeping in touch with a client and making sure that your phone number, and the way that they can access you and reach you is current and that they're aware of that, and as well as that we're aware of that as pro bono coordinators and pro bono managers and directors is super helpful. And I think that's it.
Great, thanks. So I think there are a couple of questions in the chat which kind of roll into actually nicely into our next slide and conversation area, which is, specific resources that are available to new immigration attorneys that are working in this area. But also, if someone has taken on an immigration case pro bono outside of one of these groups, are there places where they can get resources or attorneys that might help them mentor? Or for someone who needs help with an asylum application themselves, what's the best way to get connected with an organization that could help that asylum seeker or help a lawyer help that asylum seeker? So I'll kick that off to you, Morgan.
Thank you, Bonnie. So at the outset, I usually tell our pro bono attorneys or potential pro bono attorneys, we have resources. We have sample petitions, we have sample orders, we have samples, examples. I let them know that at the outset, just so they can feel more comfortable and more supported and just more confident in taking on this work. So I think that's extremely important. If you have a client or pro bono attorney who's taking on an I-589, they've never done one, you may want to provide them with the redacted I-589, which is asylum. So you may want to provide them with that just so they can know, okay, this is how I do this, or this is what it's going to look like. It just provides a level of familiarity. Additionally, you want to give them any, like I mentioned, orders. So if there are particular orders, if it's a predicate order for special merit juvenile status, if you have those and you can redact those, that's always a great idea just to help your pro bono attorneys really feel supported and comfortable. Just think of it, if you were entering a new area of law, you would probably want some type of resource or guide or example just to confirm that you're headed in the right direction to represent this client. I also tell pro bono attorneys up front, like I said earlier, that they can call me. We can set aside time for an appointment. They can email me, but resources are just so important because everybody doesn't already know how to do this type of work. So that would be my biggest takeaway, is providing the pro bono attorneys with the resource and letting them know up front before they even take on the case that you have those resources for them available.
I can add some specific thoughts with respect to the questions that were asked. For a lot of the organizations that we encounter who do assist people pro bono with asylum applications or assist asylum seekers pro bono with their cases, they are region specific or based in particular regions. So I would just encourage you to look on the EOIR website if your case is in immigration court at their pro bono list. Generally, every court does maintain a pro bono, every immigration court does maintain a pro bono organizations list that take on free representation for asylum seekers or for people who are in proceedings. I think the other question was about what mentorship resources exist for people who have taken on pro bono cases outside of an organization. I've really found the American Immigration Lawyers Association website to be very helpful, and I believe that there's a page there for mentorship where you can be matched with a mentor. So that's a resource. And then there are free resources also available through the ABA, including the ABA Pro Bono manual on removal proceedings and the dedicated docket that can be very applicable to other immigration court proceedings as well. There are resources through the Immigration Justice Campaign that I mentioned that are helpful. And then we have, as we all spoke about, I think each of us puts out some webinars every so often. So joining a listserv, joining our listservs and joining other organizations' listservs will give you access to a lot of information that you might not even have known it was available.
I would just quickly add to that too. A lot of states have state-specific resources available. I know in New York, for example, lawhelpny.org is a really great resource to find organizations doing not just immigration, but other types of legal services. If you're trying to connect somebody to legal help, that's a good place to look in New York. And I think other states have similar websites. And then just to the question about having a client already, but not being an immigration attorney, I would say if you're in that situation, certainly look to the AILA resources. But really, I want to encourage people to find clients through a legal services organization, an existing pro bono program, in part because the clients have been vetted, have been intaked, have been identified as having a particular pathway. But also, and I apologize if this is a little inside baseball, but a lot of legal service organizations have grant requirements, have specific priorities, have capacity issues. And often if we are accepting or not accepting certain types of clients, there's a reason for it. And so it can be really hard for organizations to agree to mentor a case that didn't come through our process. Those processes often exist for reasons. So again, there are certainly plenty of resources out there if you're working with somebody already, but if you are interested in getting involved in this work, I would encourage you to seek out a program that seems like a right fit for you and take on a case through a referral that way.
Great. I would also add the ABA offers free legal answers for kind of more generic questions that people might have. So they could access resources through there. And also it's a great opportunity to volunteer and do pro bono work in small slices because you're able to kind of select your area of expertise and the time that you have to answer those questions. So if you're busy one week, that's okay. You can do it the next week. We have a question from the chat that I'll kick off to everyone. Do your respective organizations provide malpractice insurance? I think obviously this is an important question for pro bono attorneys as they come into this, especially if you're like me and not in a firm per se.
HIAS does.
We do as well. One of the caveats is that our volunteers sign a volunteer agreement that lays out the expectations of the representation, but otherwise we do. And the agreement is pretty standard, and I think it's useful to have at the get-go to have volunteers understand what they're getting into.
Malpractice insurance for any type of malpractice insurance, but not for the pro bono attorneys, but we as well at Marine, we have an attorney volunteer agreement that they sign.
Right. So, so I think, if you're a solo practitioner, it's good to check in with the organization that you're working with to find out, what their malpractice covers, just to make sure that you're comfortable with that. So here's another question. If I'm interested in immigration pro bono, but I don't have any experience in direct services, what sorts of things should I be looking for outside of immigration law? For example, like trauma-informed care or cultural humility issues, those types of things.
Yeah, I don't know why you need to ask the question. That's exactly right. Those are
Care is
those
so
are the
important
things
for
that I
this
would.
population.
Oh, sorry,
Oh,
Morgan. Go ahead,
I'm
Morgan.
sorry. Are we talking at the same time? Okay, maybe there was a skip. I'm sorry. All right. So I was mentioning that trauma-informed care is so important, just based on who we serve. And so with Welcome South, we actually provide a trauma-informed sheet, just with guidelines that tell you more about the things that these clients may have gone through. And you really have to be just culturally sensitive to how you ask questions. Keeping in mind that a lot of these clients, some of them are not educated. Keeping in mind how you ask questions. For example, there are children who are applying for special immigrant juvenile status, which is based on kids who have been abused, abandoned, and or neglected by one or both parent. So you don't want to ask a child, hey, when did your dad abandon you? Or when did your mom leave you? You know, that's not the best way to ask it. So you want to find or craft ways to ask questions in more culturally sensitive ways, such as when's the last time you saw your mom, or who do you live with now? And so it's really just important to understand those differences in cultures and just everything that they've been through, and just being sensitive with how you craft your questions during your intakes.
Great. Well, thank you, everyone. I'd
We're
like to
running out
thank
of
our
time.
faculty for this program. Morgan, Sarah, and Ambreen, thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us. And on behalf of the ABA and the Commission on Immigration, I'm Bonnie Vogt. Thank you all for joining us. I'll now turn you over to our operator for some additional information.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the American Bar Association and the ABA Commission on Immigration, thank you for participating in this program. To learn more about the sponsors, visit the ABA website at americanbar.org. Thank you, and please click on the evaluation link. We value your feedback.